And I'll echo what Stefan said. I'm very optimistic about what we've learned in the last few years in regards to PRRS. We've made huge strides in many areas, and you're going to hear a lot about them today. We just heard about the regional concept. I think that's the way to go. We've had some good success in Minnesota with that, and it's exciting to see what Dale and his team are going to put together for us. Some of the tools we've got now, such as the Google mapping, such as the PRRS risk assessment tool that Dale developed and BI gifted to the AASV. That's a great new tool. You'll hear about, I think, the most exciting means of sampling that I've come across in the last 20 years of being a veterinarian, which is the oral fluid work that you'll hear from John Prickett and Dr. Zimmerman later today. I think that's just really, really cool stuff. And it's the future when it comes to monitoring populations, especially on a regional basis. And I think there's some really interesting new things we've learned about vaccinations and how to use modified live vaccines to reduce shedding in populations. We've published some of that data, and I think that's exciting. It needs expanding, but I think it's got a very, very good start. And finally, some of the things I'm going to tell you about now in regards to the ability to produce non-infected pigs, which is something we haven't been able to consistently do for a long time. And that's looking at how to apply the technique of air filtration to sow farms and keep pigs negative at the time, up to the time they're weaned. We can do so much more with those pigs when they're not infected prior to weaning. We can vaccinate them at the proper time. They can go into negative flows. It's been exciting, and I'll show you some data from Minnesota that gives me a lot of optimism for where we are today. And I think Reed Phillips said it very nicely at the World Pork Expo. You know, we've been playing defense with PRRS for so long, it's time to play offense. I think with a lot of these new strategies and tools, we have the ability to play offense for the first time in 20 years. So, with that, I hope to show you a little bit of why I'm so optimistic. I see you have a very large group of collaborators that I've been working with over the last 3 years on PRRS virus, aerobiology, and biosecurity. We've also done a little bit of work with Mycoplasma that I'll show you too. But we've got some great graduate students and postdocs, Andrea Pitkin, Satoshi Otake, Simone Oliveira, who's in the diagnostic lab at Minnesota, a molecular bacteriologist, John Dean, who's a statistical genius at the swine group, Peter Davies as well, and Steve Pohl, who's an engineer, an ag engineer in South Dakota State. But I think the real champions have been some practitioners from southern Minnesota that you might know. Gordon Sprunk, Darwin Reichs, and Paul Ruin from Pipestone, Swine Vet Center in St. Peter and Fairmont, respectively. And I'm going to show a lot of the work we've been doing with these practitioners because I think they're the true champions. Before I begin, just some disclosure for transparency. Where does the money come from? Where do the resources come from? But also just to thank these groups on this slide for the support over time. So many granting agencies, many companies, many industrial partners have supported me over the years. So I appreciate that, but I want you to let you know where they are. Also our SDEC, our Swine Disease Eradication Center. This is our group of what we call our SDEC partners. These are the organizations that provide funds or in-kind resources to help operate our center. We've got some corporate members as well as some practice members. And so it's a very diverse group of veterinary-related companies that I'd like to thank as well. And I'm going to talk about air filtration and filters. And I just want to disclose for you that I don't have financial ties with filter companies as far as royalty streams or patents or contracting or consulting arrangements. And the money I get from these companies is not used to conduct filtration-based research. It goes into our SDEC infrastructure fund, basically. So just for transparency, because I'm married to the concept, but I'm not married to any company. I think that's an important distinction. So I'm going to mention some names of some companies that I've worked with, and I want to be sure that you're comfortable that you know where that the transparency is there. All right, that's enough background. So for today, I'd like to talk about three things. And as Dale did, I modified my PowerPoint, so not all of this is in your proceedings. And you can, I guess, thank Greg Klein for some of that, because Greg and I came over from the airport yesterday, and he was asking me what's new. And the more I thought about it, boy, we've done quite a few new things in the last month. And so I'll show you some stuff that I haven't shown before, and that's some new developments in some air filtration equipment and testing. So that's not in the proceedings, but I think you'll find it interesting. So I put it in there. So I'm glad Greg challenged me. But we'll talk a little bit about updates of some projects we've been working on, a 3-year study looking at transmission and biosecurity of those two agents there, using our Swine Disease Eradication Center production region model. You're familiar with that. I'm going to give you just the new stuff and not go over the old stuff, because I think you've heard the old stuff before. Talk a little bit about our observation that the virus can travel over long distances, just to show that the airborne spread risk is real. And then I think what's the most exciting piece is how we're taking the air filtration technology into large sow farms and swine-dense regions in Minnesota. And you know, it's easy to do bore studs, but it's much more difficult to do a swine farm, a big sow farm. So we'll see what you think. Okay. So very quickly go through this study. This is a study that's been ongoing for 3 years. We'll be finishing it at the end of November. It's basically looking at a model of pork production, just trying to simulate a region, of a neighborhood, just like Dale talked about, where we've got neighbors and we've got barns that are infected and barns that aren't infected, but armed with different biosecurity levels, some with filtration, some without filtration. I think you're familiar with that stuff. We've just been going through the motions year after year now and modifying the design over time. And so we finished year 2 and got into year 3 last November and said, well, let's do something different. We've been looking at MERV-16 based air filtration now for 2 years in a row. It's perfect. It blocks PRRS virus. It blocks Mycoplasma, but there's a cost to that. Is there a cheaper filter option that we can use that'll deliver better airflow and still protect susceptible populations? So some of the modifications we've made is we've gone down a notch in our air filter of the mechanical filter variety. So we've got a facility on this site that's filtered with a MERV-14 filter. We used to have a MERV-16 filter in there. A MERV-14 filter has been in place now for the last 9 months. The MERV-14 filter is 75% efficient against particles of 0.3 microns or greater. If you contrast that to what we had been using at a 95% efficiency, so we've dropped the efficiency down. The advantages are it's a cost reduction. You don't need as many filters to filter a large facility. About a 33% reduction in cost of filtering a 3,000 sow barn with MERV-14s, and you get better airflow. You've got less media. You've got less static pressure. It needs about half the filters. So it's an interesting thing to test. And then a company called Novico came along from Quebec, and they said, well, we have another technology we'd like you to test. It's called an antimicrobial filter. This doesn't work the same way as the mechanical filters that are MERV-based. This is basically polypropylene fibers that have chemicals impregnated within the sheets of fabric that make up the filter. So the agents may pass through the filter, such as PRRS virus or Mycoplasma, but theoretically they're coated with compounds that kill these particles before they get infected. So it's kind of a contact kill principle. And I'm thinking, well, that sounds like a pretty neat idea. Let's take a look at if that works or not. So this is how our model looks now, the last year that we've been running it. We've got a source population in our neighborhood that's infected with PRRS virus Minnesota 184. This is a 300-head continuous flow grow finish facility, mechanically ventilated. Minnesota 184 is a virus we've worked with from southern Minnesota, highly virulent, also shown to be shed at high frequencies in aerosols of experimentally infected pigs, and has a higher ability to be transmitted by airborne than some of the older, less virulent isolates we've worked with in the past. We've also got a Mycoplasma co-infection in this facility, and so this is a real nice witch's cauldron of disease. There's about a 12% mortality, 30 to 40% morbidity in this barn all the time as it's run continuous flow. New animals come in about every 2 to 4 week interval. So we really stir the pot to generate aerosols for the environment. And we've collected those aerosols, virus and mycoplasma positive aerosols, outside of the facility. We've also seen them travel 120 meters and challenge our two treatments and control facilities. So these are 3 facilities meant to replicate neighbors in the neighborhood, so to speak. One facility, here's the antimicrobial facility, here's the MER14 facility, and here's our non-filtered control, a barn which is matched in all facets to the other 2 facilities, but does not have an air filtration system. What have we learned over the 9 months, with 3 more months to go in year 3? MER14 has basically been perfect. Nothing's penetrated that facility. We collect air samples on a daily basis in that facility. We do not find virus or mycoplasma entering that facility. We have not seen infection in pigs, which is encouraging. So the MER14 is behaving just like the MER16 had for the previous 2 years. The antimicrobial is working a little differently. On occasion, maybe 10% of the time, we will find a positive air sample. And we're collecting these samples as the air passes through the filter on the inside of the barn. Okay, so we're not outside of the barn in this case. We're not in the pig air space. We're right at the point of air introduction to the facility. And we have found a small number of PRRS virus positive air samples, a small number of mycoplasma positive air samples, but we haven't seen any infection in the pigs yet. Okay, so the big question is, how long will these chemicals stay working under agricultural conditions? The company says 2 years, but that's based on laboratory information. So we need to test this further. So we don't know, but so far so good. Look what's happening in our non-filtered control. These barns are only about 12 feet apart from one another. But during these 9 months, we've had quite an extensive challenge to the area. Here's each replicate is a 4-week period of time. So each replicate is 1 month. You can see that in replicate 14, which was the start of year 3, or the first replicate in year 3, coming off year 2, everything was negative in the pigs, but we did start to break down and had a PRRS virus infection. The following month, the mycoplasma infection, PRRS and myco, PRRS. A lot of action that winter in our control facility. Now it's starting to calm down a little bit in the summer, but we just had a break in July. We've had a very cold July, and there's been a lot of PRRS virus infections in the field in the month of July in Minnesota, and our little model seemed to replicate that as well. We've got some interesting weather data we're collecting kind of in real time using a weather station on site, just to show you, this hasn't been analyzed statistically, but just to show you what the weather's been like on our PRRS positive and mycopositive air days where we had an airborne transmission event. You can see those numbers there in metric units, but they're very, very similar. If you look at it, just numerically similar, not much difference in some of those days. So we're looking at fairly cool days, humid days, matching a lot of the work that one of Jeff's students did, Joe Herman, looking at the effect of temperature and humidity. The wind is moving at a fairly slow pace, moderate velocity there, not very high. Wind direction is from the northwest, of course. We're biasing for that because of the placement of the buildings, so that's a bit biased. But solar intensity is very, very low. These numbers are actually quite low. If you measure this, if you looked at these units on a bright sunny day, they'd be in the 2000s. So as we're measuring watts of energy and photons, these are very, very low numbers indicative of fog, early morning, the sun hasn't quite come up yet, cloudy days. And so just as you'd expect, cloudy, cool, prevailing winds with a moderate velocity, mild to slow to moderate velocities is what we're seeing here. So not really that surprising, but just been good to confirm. So to conclude year 3, pretty soon around the corner we go, but so far we can say that our region, our neighborhood, is under heavy challenge. Clearly, with the data from the non-filtered control building, the area is being challenged. Both types of filters are preventing infection. They're working differently, but they are preventing pig infection, which is what we want. We'll conclude it this November, and then we'll probably run a little bit of extra time looking at even a cheaper filter, and then an old antimicrobial filter. to see I'd like to try to break that filtered barn, see how low can we go. I think it's important that we understand the ceiling as well as the floor as far as the air filtration that we can go. So we're going to use a MERV 11, which is about a 35% efficiency. We're getting down to almost a furnace filter efficiency here, so we'll see what happens there. And then we're going to take a 2-year-old antimicrobial, one that's been in the barn for a while, and we'll see if those chemicals are still working. So we're planning on running maybe one last 6-month extra period of time to answer some of those questions. And basically it's been 952 days down and 259 days to go, and I can't wait till that damn project's over, that's all I'll say. But it's been good. It's been good. Okay, so that's project number 1, brief overview or review what we're seeing with year 3, what we think we'll finish up with. The second is just a quick review of some of our work showing that these 2 agents can indeed travel long distances in the air. Our objective was to prove and provide evidence that that's possible. There's been a number of investigations showing airborne spread over shorter distances, but nothing really long distance that would pertain to the field. Our hypothesis was that under certain conditions, yeah, I bet that can happen. What we did was using our SDEC site, as we've had in conjunction with this ongoing study, we set up a sampling area in the region. And so here's our finishing facility, which we call the source population right there. And that's, again, 300 head, grow-finished pigs, continuous flow, fan-ventilated barn. Okay, so it's not a very big population. But because of the pig flow, it's a lot of pathogen shedding and spreading and disease going on in there. We set up a sampling map, as you can kind of see here, at various distances from the source population. And for a 50-day period, based on wind direction, we'd go downwind and start taking air samples. So for example, if, say at 5 in the morning, the wind was blowing this way, we would start up here, collect air samples for a period of time, then we'd move closer, collect samples, and then we'd finish up by taking one right from the source. So based on wind direction each morning, looking at the weather vane on our weather station, that's where we'd go and set up. Okay? This is what the area is like. It's flat. There's not a whole lot to get in the way of these aerosols. And we did some measuring of altitudes. There was only about 1 meter difference of elevation from the source population to some of our long-distance sampling points. So it's a very flat area. This is actually 1 mile from the farm, and this is actually 2 miles from the farm. What we found is of about 300 samples, we found 4 that were positive for PRRS virus. Those positive samples were all found 4.7 kilometers, which is about 3 miles, in the northwesterly direction from the source. Now you're probably wondering, is this a finishing facility right here that could be contaminating? No, that's a poultry barn. So there aren't any farms around this area for about 5 miles. So there aren't a lot of other sources of virus. So we found out that this virus was alive. We titered it in the laboratory. We put it into negative pigs. They became infected. We also sequenced it and found that it matched our isolate here. So a very small number of virus positive samples, but kind of cool. Now, talking about Joe Herman again, which again is one of Jeff Zimmerman's students, I think one of his best students, right along with John Prickett. Joe did some really cool work at developing a half-life equation for predicting half-life of virus in aerosols with the effects of temperature and humidity. And he's published that, Vet Research, a really nice piece of work. And so I wanted to see if that equation that he developed would help us predict whether an aerosol could transport infectious virus in our model out to 4.7 miles. Did what we see match what Joe had predicted? So looking at our temperature data and humidity data on virus-positive air days, on the days where we found that virus of 4.7 kilometers, what was the mean temperature and the mean relative humidity on those days? Well, it was at 7.1 Celsius degrees and about 89% humidity. Plugging that into Joe's equation, the half-life of the virus in an aerosol would be 74 minutes. Okay? Now, based on our wind velocity average that we found during those positive air days, which was 3 meters per second, this virus-laden aerosol would travel that 4.7 kilometers in a 26-minute period of time. So clearly within the half-life calculation, or estimated half-life, of Joe's equation. So I think these data support each other very well on the ability to predict whether live virus could be transported over long distances and still remain viable, and also some data to document, to back up the fact that yes, that could happen. So I give a lot of credit to Joe. Mycoplasma was a little different, wasn't quite as unidirectional. Here's our source population. We did find 6 positive mycoplasma samples out of roughly 300. They were kind of all over the place. But we did find them out here, 2.3 kilometers, 4.7 kilometers, and then 4.7 and 4.7. So that was kind of all over the board. But we did find some mycoplasma positive samples as well out at 4.7 kilometers. So the conclusion was, yes, the airborne transport of virus and mycoplasma could occur out to this distance. I would predict, based on Joe's equation and the fact we found viable virus at 1 to 2 logs of concentration, that they would probably go farther under these conditions, you know, very flat topography and certain environmental conditions. The organisms we found were homologous to those present in the source population, so we knew where they came from, and again, the virus was alive at that long distance point. Okay, so that's project 2. Project 3, I think is my favorite so far. It's one we've just started. This is my portion of what we call our PRRSCAP 2 project that Jeff is a PI on. Daryl Holkamp from Iowa State University is also involved. It's a really nice collaborative project. My component of this project is a evaluation of the efficacy of air filtration in large sow herds in swine-dense regions. And so that we've done the production region model stuff. A lot of the practitioners had done the boar studs, but what about the sow farms? That's a big, big difference, isn't it? There's, 3,000 sows, you got 10 to 12 people, you got a lot of turnover each year. It's a different type of an environment, a different dynamic than the boar stud, isn't it? So we put together a team of the University of Minnesota, Steve Pohl, the ag engineer from South Dakota State, who does all the filtration specs for us, Pipestone Veterinary Clinic, Fairmont, and Swine Vet Center. And we went to those clinicians and asked for the ability to work with some of their sow farms and selected them based on certain criteria. We wanted large sow farms. We wanted good history of at least 3 new virus introductions based on ORF5 sequencing over the last 4 years. So 3 or more times over the last 4 years, these farms had to have a new infection. Okay? We wanted them in swine-dense regions with at least 4 pig sites out of their control in the surrounding 3-mile radius, so at least 4, hopefully more. And they had to have industry-standard biosecurity, meaning they had to have a transport protocol that was scientifically valid, protocol for personnel entry, full mite control, all those things that you know all about. The duration of the study ideally will be 4 years. That's the length of the CAP 2, so we have to make sure we get funding every year, but we'd like to keep running this for a while. And we'd like to measure whether new viruses get in to treatment farms, such as the filtered farms, versus our non-filtered controls. And we're trying to measure some cost-benefit at the end. So what have we seen so far? And we've run 1 year of this project. We're just getting to the end of August, which is the end of year 1. Basically what we've done is we've put together the team. We've selected the farms. We have, we want 10 treatment farms and 20 some control farms. So 10 filtered farms ideally and 21 non-filtered farms that fill all the other selection criteria. We've got 4 farms that have been filtered since the start of the study last September. So 4 of those farms have been identified. They've been filtered for at least this first year. There's 6 more farms that are under filtration at this time. So by the time September rolls around, October, we'll have the rest of those farms in the data set. And then we've been going to these farms every month. The practitioners have been bleeding weaned pigs, looking for clinical signs, looking for entry of new virus We've been auditing the biosecurity and such. So that's been kind of what's happening. Here are some of the characteristics of the farms in our filtered database and our non-filtered database. Here's the mean breeding herd inventory in treatment and control farms, and you see the range, so large farms. Here's the history of external virus introduction in treatments and controls, about 1 virus every 13 months on average, very similar in the controls. And then here are the number of sites within that 3-mile radius. Again, these are sites out of their control that are not in their flow. And you can see the average of sites around these farms is about 8, with some extremes on the range. Okay, so that's what the data set looks like at this time. Basically, the air filtration is done up in the attic. This is the attic of the sow farm. It's got filter boxes up in the attic. So technically, contaminated air enters up through the soffits. It's pulled by negative pressure through these air filter boxes, which are basically a pre-filter, about $3 a piece, and then either the MERV 16 or the MERV 14 filter here. What we've seen so far in year 1, we have not had any virus introductions in any of the 4 filtered farms. Obviously, we don't have all our farms in that data set yet, and we need to prove sustainability over time. But I think we had a good first year to get started, especially when we look at the fact that about 13 of the 21 control farms have experienced new infections. Some of them have become infected twice in 1 year with different viruses. And we've seen a lot of interesting performance observations. Mortalities in nurseries go from 20 to 2%. Some nice reproductive improvements on the farms, so we want to document that. So we're seeing something in the pigs as well, as we're keeping virus out. Dale showed a survival curve. This is just a very little survival curve as well from these data. These are the filtered farms up here. You can see that we've survived so far, no infections. And we've got our control farms in blue. They're kind of breaking down over time. And then our pre-filtered farms. We've got a lot of historical data on these farms, and we can see that before they were filtered, they kind of matched the controls based on historical data. So it's just kind of showing, and we've got to build that database and increase that time period to demonstrate sustainability. But good start so far. Okay, last topic, and again, credit to Greg Klein for bringing this forward. This is some new stuff we just finished, and I haven't rolled it out before, so this might be pretty rough, but I think you might be interested in it. We've got a new filter candidate on the market. We've got a tool to reduce the risk of backdrafting of air through idle fans, and we've got a small assessment of what damaged filters do, okay, to virus penetration. Now, these are all laboratory-based studies, and we've got a lab that has a dual-chamber model where we basically can, in what our donor chamber, we can aerosolize. We actually use the vaccine virus, MLV, the live PRRS virus vaccine. And we can aerosolize that vaccine virus in one chamber. We can put an intervention here, right before a duct. We have a fan that pulls air from the donor chamber to the recipient chamber. And in that recipient chamber, we've got our air samplers, the same ones we use on the research farm. And we're collecting air to see if virus can penetrate the intervention. Okay? So we're not measuring whether it's live or dead, really. We're just measuring whether it can get through the penetration. This is how we've measured all the other filters that we've talked about so far before they would go into the farm. Okay, the new filter candidate is from a company called ClairCore. And this is a different company that we haven't worked with in the past. We've worked with CamFilFar on the MERV 14 and 16, and we've worked with, as I mentioned, Novico. So here's another company, and I think this is important that we have competition. And so, of course, these filters have to hold up. We're not going to work with filters that don't have what it takes. But this is an interesting filter. It's electrostatic charged polypropylene. So instead of fiberglass, it's a polypropylene media that's got electrostatic charge on it. So the polypropylene is interesting because it could probably handle moisture better than the fiberglass. And the electrostatic charge, basically, as you'd think, attracts or repels particles. So it's kind of like a little cherry on top of a sundae. You know, you got a little extra barrier or buffer. And we worked with one that was rated as MERV 16 based on the MERV rating system. Now, when we challenged it in our model, it did indeed test as a MERV 16 when it was charged. But you can decharge these things. And we discharged the filter to see what would happen once that charge was gone. What would that filter efficiency drop to? There's a lot of publications that say these filters, when discharged, can drop down to MERV 11. And we didn't want to just rely solely on charge, because charge can dissipate within 3 months, according to, again, published data. But this one, encouragingly, worked as a MERV 14, tested as a MERV 14 under our virus challenge model after discharge. So that was encouraging. That was encouraging, because we can definitely work with MERV 14s, but right now I'm not so confident we can go down below that, at least not at the cell farm level. And it also tested as a MERV 14 based on Steve Pohl's assessment of airflow. And I don't have exact figures, but this filter could be going in a bit cheaper than what we've had to deal with in the past. So we might have a good technology that might be coming in at a lower price, which is always good. Okay, so that's something new. Backdrafting of idle fans has always been the biggest nightmare for us in regards to protecting these farms. You know, what happens when the stage 2 fans aren't working? What happens when a fan breaks down? How do you stop non-filtered air from entering these facilities? In the past, we've hung Tyvek sheets or put on cadaver bags on fans, kind of like a windsock effect, and when they're on, they blow out, and when they turn off, the negative pressure sucks them up against the fan carriage. Yeah, that's okay, but is there something better? We talked to AP, and AP put together a really neat concept of a dual shutter. And this is a model that I tested. And basically it's got a pre-shutter, which is this little plastic shutter, and then it's got an aluminum shutter. So it's a 2-stage shutter system. And the pre-shutter acts like the pre-filter, as you'd expect it does, to reduce some of the challenge. And this aluminum filter is really nice. It's got rubber gaskets around the blades. It's got spring-loaded. It looks like a really nice filter, or I'm sorry, shutter. And we tested this, and it actually performed very well. It prevented virus penetration at a 7-log challenge, and so a very high-level virus challenge, which breaks down a lot of filters, actually. We did overwhelm it with a 9-log challenge. We did find the breaking point. But those levels are probably very unrealistic for what's out there in the real world based on what we've seen from some of our testing. So I'm pretty excited. Now, I don't know what this thing's going to cost, but I think the technology is there now to stop or at least reduce this backdrafting risk. So I'm excited about that. The last thing we did was, what happens when we damage these fiberglass filters? And oftentimes this happens when they're getting put in. You know, you put in 2,000 of these in a sow farm up in the attic. That's really hard work. People get tired. Their hands start to slip. And they start to damage these things with their fingers. They can be mild degrees of damage, just shallow finger depressions. If you push on this material, this fiberglass material, it does give. You can dent it pretty easy. So these are real common, these mild finger depressions. There's lacerations when you're putting them in and you're going to clip them together. There's metal there. We've seen them get cut along the side. And then obviously there's the real bad ones where the fingers go like that. You know, you got these big depressions. And we have seen a case where there's been a little bit of rodent infestation. Sometimes the mice will actually eat some holes through these things. So what we wanted to do is get some filters and mimic these damages and test them individually with the model. So here's just, might be a little hard to see, but here are some of the finger indents that we made. We measured them from an existing filter that had been damaged in the field and tried to recreate that. Here's a laceration. It's about a 5-inch laceration with a 1/2-inch depth. Tried to recreate that. Here's the real severe, the finger, where the guy really grabbed a hold of it a little bit too hard and punched his fingers in deep. And then here's the rodent damage. And we have found some of these filters where the mice have actually eaten their way through. You can see they leave some debris behind. As you'd expect, these 2 degrees or levels of damage, you know, everything flew through those. Low doses, high doses. These were bad news. except at very, very high levels of virus challenge, the finger indentations didn't seem to have an effect. So I'm not so worried about these anymore, and these are obviously real obvious problems. The ones that are scary to me are these lacerations, because they're not that easy to see sometimes, because you're putting that filter in, it hits that corner of the metal, and it just makes a tear, and sometimes you're not able to see that. But this one opened the door for low virus penetration. Low doses of virus was able to pass through this filter and be collected in that recipient chamber. The good news is you can repair these. You can repair these with silicone, and so it's not necessarily means you got to throw them away. So the good news from this is I don't think we have to worry about these. We can repair these, and these, of course, tells you that there's something else going on that you need to work on. Okay, so that's real brief, not a lot of data, but we'll summarize it and try to have it ready for layman conference if any of you are coming to show you some specific numbers. But I just wanted to throw out some of the new things we've been doing to try to answer some of these questions. And close with some take-home messages from this talk. PRRS virus can be transported over long distance by the airborne route. A lot of you probably already knew that, but this just gives you some proof. Air filtration, I'm completely convinced, is an effective tool for the control of airborne diseases in swine-dense regions. It will be impossible to maintain non-infected pig populations in swine-dense regions without some type of air filtration or aerosol biosecurity. And I think some of the equipment companies are stepping forward now with some technological advancements to answer these questions, and hopefully we're trying to fill some of the knowledge gaps with some of these projects. And for me, what's most exciting is, for the first time in 20 plus years of working with this virus as a practitioner and then as a researcher, we can actually stop PRRS virus transmission between farms on a consistent basis, and we're just going to keep trying it and testing it and try to get enough years under our belt where it's no longer an issue of sustainability. So that's where I am, and I appreciate the time to visit with you, and thank Dan Johnson again for the great meeting, and everybody at BI for all their tremendous support over the years. So thank you very much.